The first sound is not a gunshot. It is the scream of metal tearing apart, followed by the heavy, choking smell of smoke and disinfectant colliding in the same breath. A field hospital lamp swings wildly overhead, casting shadows that jump like living things across the walls. Somewhere outside, boots pound against frozen ground. Inside, a woman's hands steady despite the chaos pressed down on a wounded soldier's chest. Counting breaths she may not have time to finish. Then the door bursts open. Foreign voices. Shouted orders. The clatter of rifles. In that instant, she understands something before anyone says a word. The hospital has fallen. She is no longer a doctor protected by a Red Cross. She is a prisoner. And within minutes, she will be given a choice no medical training ever prepared her for, one that history itself seems to have erased. What exactly did they force her to do after they captured her? This story unfolds in the winter of a world at war. When borders shifted faster than maps could be printed, and hospitals became targets as often as fortresses, the place is a makeshift medical station near a contested front canvas walls. Oil lamps and blood-soaked bandages stacked higher than supplies. The woman at the center of this story is a trained military doctor, one of the few allowed near the front because lives depended on speed, not comfort. She had sworn an oath to treat the wounded, regardless of uniform. But war does not honor oaths. When enemy forces overran the position, the wounded who could not flee were abandoned to fate, and so was she. What was at risk now was more than her life. It was her integrity, her silence, and the lives of men who would soon be placed under her hands again, this time as captives. And even as she was marched away under guard, she noticed something deeply wrong. The soldiers escorting her were not taking her to a camp. They were taking her somewhere else. The transport stops long before dawn. No barbed wire. No guard towers. Just a commandeered building, its windows blacked out, its corridors smelling of damp stone and fear. Inside, she is separated from other prisoners without explanation. Hours pass. Then a senior officer enters, calm, almost polite. He does not shout. He does not threaten. Instead, he places documents on the table, medical charts written in her language. Names she recognizes, conditions she knows too well. He tells her she has been selected to continue her work. Selected because refusal would be inconvenient. The implication hangs heavy in the air. Outside the door, someone screams in pain. The officer leans closer and asks a question that turns her blood cold. How loyal is a doctor allowed to be when she belongs to the enemy? Her answer will decide what happens next and whether she will ever be allowed to leave this room alive. The first thing she learns is that captivity does not begin with chains. It begins with uncertainty. Hours blur together as she is moved through corridors that never seem to end. Each one colder than the last, the air thick with damp stone and old smoke. Boots echo endlessly behind her, always close enough to remind her she is being watched, never close enough to feel human. When the door finally opens, it is not a cell. It is an operating room, but one stripped of identity. No flags, no insignia. Just bare walls, harsh lamps, and a surgical table stained by work done in silence. The chaos begins. Immediately, wounded men are dragged in without warning. Some wear the uniforms of the enemy. Some wear none at all. Blood trails across the floor, sticky underfoot, mixing with melted snow tracked in from outside. Orders come fast, and in clipped tones she barely understands, yet the meaning is unmistakable. Work. There is no introduction. No explanation. A pair of gloves is shoved into her hands, already damp with someone else's sweat. The lamp above flickers as artillery thunders somewhere beyond the walls, close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Every vibration sends a shiver through the metal instruments laid out before her. Each one rattling like it knows it will soon be needed. She begins automatically. Muscle memory overriding fear. Incisions, pressure, counting breaths. But something is wrong. The guards do not step back. They stand inches away, rifles angled downward, watching every movement. When she reaches for anesthesia, a hand stops her. A single shake of the head. Not enough supply. Not for everyone. She looks up, expecting resistance, but finds only expectation. They are not asking her to heal. They are asking her to choose. The room fills faster, then it empties. Outside, more stretchers arrive. Inside, the wounded groan and cry out. Its voices overlapping until they blend into a single, endless sound, a low animal plea that claws at her nerves. Sweat drips down her spine beneath her coat. Her hands tremble once, just once, before she forces them steady again. She reminds herself that panic kills faster than bullets. But panic is everywhere. In the eyes of the men on the table, in the way the guards flinch at every distant explosion, in the sudden realization that no one here has a plan beyond survival. Then the questioning begins. Between procedures, officers step forward, pretending to review charts while quietly probing for answers. How many men were stationed at the hospital? How often did supply convoys arrive? Did she recognize any of the wounded by name? The questions are framed as casual conversation, but the rifles never move. She answers carefully, truth diluted with uncertainty. Each response feels like stepping across thin ice. Too little, and suspicion grows. Too much, and something inside her breaks. Time loses meaning. There are no windows. Only the lamps overhead, always bright, always unforgiving. She is not allowed to sleep. When exhaustion finally dulls her thoughts, a new emergency jolts her back into focus. A chest wound. Massive bleeding. A man younger than her students back home, eyes wide with terror as he grips her sleeve. Begging in a language she barely understands. She knows exactly what to do, but knows also that supplies are gone. She improvises, tearing cloth, repurposing tools, praying her hands remember techniques she was never meant to use this way. Some survive. Some don't, and every time a heart stops beating beneath her palms, she feels the weight of unseen judgment settle heavier on her shoulders. The guards whisper to one another. Names are written down. Decisions remembered outside the operating room. Chaos reigns. She hears shouting, hurried footsteps, the unmistakable crack of gunfire somewhere inside the same building. At one point, the lights flicker and die completely, plunging the room into darkness. For a breathless moment, no one moves. Then emergency lamps sputter to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. In that half-light, she sees fear on every faced enemy and prisoner alike. War has stripped them all down to the same fragile core. She has moved again, this time to a different room, smaller, quieter. The smell is worse here, stale blood. Disinfectant, barely masking decay. A single patient lies waiting, guarded more heavily than the others. No one speaks his name, but the tension around him is unmistakable. She senses that whatever happens here will matter far beyond this room. As she prepares, an officer leans in close enough that she can smell tobacco on his breath. He speaks softly, almost kindly, explaining the importance of timing, of outcomes, of consequences. She understands perfectly. Her hands move with clinical precision, but her mind fractures into pieces. One part counts sutures. Another calculates survival odds. Another screams silently, demanding to know how this became her responsibility. The patient's breathing falters. The officer's gaze sharpens. She knows that saving this man too quickly, or not quickly enough, could alter lives she will never see. Her oath presses against the invisible boundaries of her captivity, stretching thin. Outside, the battle surges again. The walls tremble harder now. Dust clouds the air. Someone shouts that the perimeter has been breached. For a moment, she thinks this might be the end, that the chaos will swallow them all and free her from impossible choices. But the moment passes. The guards tighten their formation. Orders snap back into place. The war does not end. It simply adapts. As the hours grind on, something changes inside her. Fear does not vanish, but it sharpens. She begins to notice patterns. Which officers watch her most closely? Which guards look away at critical moments? Which questions are tests and which are traps? Survival, she realizes, depends on reading people as precisely as wounds. Late into what might be night, she overhears two soldiers whispering near the door. A doctor from another section refused an order earlier that day. No one has seen him since. The words hang in the air, heavier than any threat spoken aloud. She does not ask questions. She does not react. But something inside her locks into place. Silence, she understands, is no longer passive. It is a skill. She continues working. Her body aches. Her vision blurs. Blood stains her sleeves so deeply that she can no longer tell where one patient ended and another began. Yet still, they bring more. Still the lamps burn. Still the questions come. And with every passing hour, the line between healer and captive grows thinner, more dangerous to cross. By the time the last stretcher of that endless stretch is carried out, she no longer measures time in minutes or hours, but in lives altered, saved, or lost under her hands. She knows now that this is not temporary. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a system, and she has been absorbed into it, and somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion and fear, a colder realization takes hold, one that chills her more than the stone walls ever could. If she survives this, the hardest part will not be what she was forced to do. It will be living with the knowledge that she learned how to endure it. Asterisk, by the time the order finally comes. She already knows it will. There is a stillness that precedes it, a pause in the chaos so unnatural it feels louder than artillery. The wounded stop arriving. The corridors outside fall quiet. Even the guards seem restrained, standing straighter, speaking less. The air inside the building feels heavier, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. She wipes her hands clean for the first time in what feels like days, the water running red before turning pink, then clear. Her reflection stares back at her from the cracked metal basin, eyes sunken. Face pale, someone older than the woman who entered captivity. Footsteps approach. Not hurried. Deliberate this time, they do not shout orders. They do not rush her. Instead, she is escorted down a corridor she has never been allowed to see before. Past doors that are always locked. Past rooms whose purpose she can only guess at by the smells. Leaking from beneath them, blood, smoke, fear. At the end waits a guarded chamber with reinforced doors and brighter lighting than anywhere else in the building. Inside, a single surgical table stands prepared. Clean, sterile, almost respectful. The man on the table is already unconscious. Even before anyone explains, she understands the significance. The guards here are different, better equipped, more disciplined. The officers wear insignia she recognizes instantly. This patient matters. Not because of who he is as a person, but because of what he represents. Intelligence, morale, leverage, the kind of life whose survival or death ripples far beyond one room. An officer finally speaks. His voice is calm, measured, practiced. He tells her the injury is severe, but treatable. He also tells her the timing must be exact. Not too fast, not too slow. The words are carefully chosen, wrapped in professional language, but the meaning beneath them is unmistakable. They are asking her to weaponize her skill, to turn medical knowledge into a controlled variable of war. Her chest tightens. This is the moment she has been unconsciously bracing for since the first. Operation Under Guard. This is the line she hoped would never appear so clearly in front of her. She feels the weight of her oath press against her ribs like a second heart, beating out of sync with everything around her. The lamps hum overhead. Instruments gleam. The patient breathes shallowly, chest rising and falling like a fragile promise. She asks for clarification. The officer does not repeat himself. He simply meets her eyes and waits. Around them, guards shift their weight, fingers resting on triggers. There is no written order, no signature, no document that could later be traced. Whatever happens here will leave no official record only. Consequences, she nods. The operation begins. Her hands move with practiced precision. But her mind fractures into parallel tracks. One follows anatomy, blood flow, pressure points. Another calculates time, how long the body can endure shock before damage becomes irreversible. Another watches the faces around her, reading reactions, measuring expectations. Every incision feels heavier than the last. Every decision carries more than medical weight. The room grows unbearably hot under the lamps. Sweat drips from her temples. Her breathing slows deliberately, controlled, even as her pulse hammers in her ears. She is acutely aware of how thin the margin is between success and failure. How easily a fraction of a second could tip the outcome in either direction. The officer watches the clock on the wall more than he watches her hands. Then something goes wrong, not catastrophically. Not enough to halt the operation, but enough to force a choice. A complication emerges, subtle, dangerous, familiar to her trained eye. She can correct it immediately, restoring stability. Or she can take a different approach. Slower, riskier, plausible, an approach that buys time without openly endangering the patient. The room seems to shrink around her. She feels every eye lock onto her hands. No one speaks. No one intervenes. This is the moment they want. This is the moment they will remember. She hears her own voice inside her head, calm and clinical, listing options, outcomes, probabilities. She also hears another voice quieter. It's more human, asking what she will have to live with afterward. She makes her decision. The adjustment is small, almost invisible to anyone without her level of expertise. A choice that would look defensible on any medical chart if there were charts to write. The patient's vital signs stabilize, but not completely. The clock keeps ticking. The officer's jaw tightens. He understands enough to know this is intentional, but not enough to prove it. Minutes stretch into eternity. Outside, building shudders again as distant explosions roll closer. Somewhere above them, someone is shouting orders. The war presses in from all sides, impatient, unforgiving. Inside the operating room, time has narrowed to the space between heartbeats. Finally, the moment passes. The patient survives, but only just. He is alive, but fragile, dependent, vulnerable, exactly what they needed. The officer exhales slowly, then nods once. The guards relax by a fraction. No praise is offered. No accusation made. Instead, something more dangerous occurs. They thank her. From that point forward, everything changes. She is no longer treated as a disposable prisoner. She is given marginally better rations, shorter guard shifts, occasional access to medical texts, not privileged investments. They begin bringing her cases that no one else is allowed to see. Prisoners whose survival is strategically inconvenient, soldiers whose deaths must appear natural, injuries that require discretion more than skill, each time. The expectation is unspoken but clear. Her reputation spreads quietly through the facility. Not as a healer, but as someone reliable. Someone who understands the balance between obedience and outcome. Someone who will not panic, will not refuse outright, will not leave evidence behind. With every operation, the pressure increases. Sleep becomes fragmented. Dreams bleed into waking hours. She starts hearing phantom monitors, imagined heartbeats echoing in silence. Her hands develop a slight tremor when idle, vanishing only when she works. She stops counting how many men pass under her care. Numbers feel dangerous. Numbers invite memory. One night, she is summoned again urgently this time. A prisoner has been injured during interrogation. The damage is severe. The guards are agitated. This man is not important enough to save at all costs, but too important to let die quickly. They want him conscious later, able to speak, able to remember. The implication makes her stomach churn as she works. She hears fragments of what was done to him before he arrived. Not details, just enough to fill the gaps with her own imagination. She keeps her face neutral, professional, detached. Inside, something cracks. Not loudly, quietly, like ice under pressure. The man survives the night. When she steps back, exhausted, blood-soaked, numb, she realizes with sudden clarity that this is the climax of her captivity. The single operation, not the critical patient, but the transformation itself. The moment she understands, she is no longer waiting for rescue. She is enduring. She is adapting. She is becoming someone history will struggle to categorize. Late that same night, an officer pulls her aside. His tone is almost conversational. He tells her the war may not last much longer, that borders are shifting, that records are being simplified, suggests carefully that her cooperation could ensure her survival after liberation. That silence in the right places is often rewarded. She says nothing, because now she knows the truth. The most dangerous part of what she has been forced to do is not written in any order, or file, or report. It is written into her own survival, into the fact that she is still standing, still useful, still breathing, and as she is led back to her quarters, the corridor lights dimming behind her. One final realization settles over her with chilling certainty. If the war ends tomorrow, the choices she made here will not. They will follow her for the rest of her life. Asterisk, when the guns finally fall silent. It does not feel like peace. It feels like a vacuum. The kind that pulls sound, certainty, and meaning out of the air, leaving only echoes behind. The compound empties in stages, orders shouted, files carried away, furnaces stoked through the night. She watches from a narrow window as smoke rises in steady columns, the last of the records turning to ash. Names, dates, decisions, burned until deed. Nothing remains that could point back to her hands. By dawn, the building that once hummed with guarded urgency is a shell, stripped of its purpose, pretending it never mattered. Liberation arrives without ceremony. New uniforms, different accents, familiar questions asked by unfamiliar faces. She is processed, examined, and listed as recovered. No one asks where she worked inside the compound. No one presses for details. The war is ending, and the world is hungry for clean stories, heroes, victories, clear lines between right and wrong. She senses immediately that hers will not be one of them. When she opens her mouth to speak, the words tangle and dissolve. How does one explain choices made under lamps that never dimmed, with rifles always within reach? How does one describe obedience that was neither surrender nor consent, but something colder, more precise? She returns home thinner, quieter, older than her papers suggest. The city celebrates around her parades, speeches, flags unfurled like promises kept. She stands at the edge of crowds and feels nothing. At night, she wakes to phantom sounds, the tick of a clock, the hum of lamps, the soft, terrible pause between heartbeats. She washes her hands until the skin cracks, as if blood might still be there, invisible but undeniable. When colleagues ask about captivity, she offers safe fragments. Hunger, cold, fatigue, the acceptable suffering. The rest remains locked behind her eyes. Years pass. The world rebuilds. Archives open, then close again. Official histories are written with confidence and footnotes, their certainty smoothing over the places where truth would snag. Her name appears only briefly, if at all, listed among those who returned, who resumed practice, who lived. In private, she keeps notebooks no one else sees. Not confessions. Not quite diaries, observations, clinical, restrained. A sentence about timing. A margin note about silence. A page torn out and destroyed whenever the words get too close to the center of things. Occasionally, a letter arrives from a former prisoner, from a family member, from someone who survived because of her skill. Gratitude sits uneasily with her. She accepts it with a nod, with a practiced expression, never explaining that survival was never a simple gift she could give or withhold. Some nights she imagines the faces of those who did not make it, faces that history will never name. She wonders if they would recognize her now. She wonders if she recognizes herself. Decades later, a researcher finds a reference that doesn't quite fit. A medical anomaly. A survival curve that bends the wrong way. A gap where documentation should be. Questions are asked gently, then not at all. Witnesses are gone. The woman herself is elderly, her voice thin, her memory selective by necessity rather than age. When pressed, she smiles politely and changes the subject. Silence, she has learned, ages better than truth. On her final night, the notebooks sit untouched on a table beside her bed. Outside, the city is quiet in a way it never was during the war. She stares at the ceiling and listens to her breathing, steady and shallow. There is no absolution waiting for her, no condemnation either. Only the knowledge that history is not made solely by what is written down, but by what survives unspoken. The morning after she dies, her belongings are sorted, clothes, photographs, certificates, the notebooks are found and debated, then shelved, then forgotten again. Somewhere between preservation and loss, the story slips back into the shadows. What she was forced to do as a POW doctor remains largely unwritten, not because it lacked importance, but because it resists simplicity. And that is where the story ends. Not with a verdict, not with a confession, but with a question that refuses to fade when survival itself becomes a form of complicity. Where does history draw the line, and who decides which truths are allowed to live?